The rain came down in sheets that night, the kind of cold, bone-deep rain that makes the world feel like it has narrowed to just the small circle of light from a distant street lamp. Marcus Williams stood at the edge of Route 9, just outside of Clarkfield, Ohio, his worn canvas bag hanging from one hand, his other arm stretched out toward the passing headlights. He had been standing there for nearly 40 minutes. He had counted 17 cars. 17 pairs of headlights that slowed just enough to see him, a tall black man in a faded jacket, soaked through, standing alone in the dark, and then accelerated away without stopping. He watched each set of taillights diminish down the road, and did not call after them, did not curse them, did not even let himself feel the full weight of what each one represented. He was past the point where individual rejections could surprise him. What surprised him anymore was the opposite. The moments when someone stopped, when something went right, when the world behaved as though he were a person it intended to keep. Those moments still caught him off guard, even after 38 years. Marcus did not take it personally anymore. That was perhaps the saddest part. He had stopped taking it personally a long time ago. He was 38 years old, and he had spent the last 14 of those years working the floor at Consolidated Steel in Millhaven. 6 days a week, early shifts, late shifts, double shifts when the orders came in heavy. He had run the line with a precision that his floor supervisor, Earl Tatum, used to call machine grade. Marcus had taken that as a compliment. He had saved a little money, not much, but enough to feel like the floor beneath his feet was solid. Enough to feel like the future was a place he was actually moving toward, rather than just surviving inside. Then the plant announced its closure on a gray Tuesday morning in February, and everything that had felt solid turned to smoke. The notice was posted on the break room bulletin board at 6:15 in the morning. By 6:30, 312 men and women had read it. By noon, most of them had gone home to figure out what came next. Marcus had stayed until the end of his shift because he did not know what else to do. The months after the closure moved slowly and badly. He filed for unemployment. He updated a resume he barely knew how to format. He applied to other plants, to warehouses, to loading docks, to anywhere that needed someone who knew how to operate heavy machinery and work a 12-hour shift without complaint. He got a few callbacks, some interviews, nothing that turned into an offer. His savings, which had felt modest but real, began to disappear in the way that savings always do when there is no income, first in chunks, then in a slow and steady bleed that was somehow worse than the chunks. His landlord, a man named Gerald Poole, who had always been cordial enough in the parking lot, knocked on his door on the 1st of October, with a notice in hand and an expression that managed to be simultaneously apologetic and firm. Marcus had 2 weeks. He packed what mattered into his old travel bag and left the rest. The television, the furniture he had bought piece by piece from secondhand stores, the small framed photograph of his mother that he had kept on the kitchen counter, he took that. He took the photograph and the clothes and the bag, and he walked out of that apartment without looking back, because looking back had never done him any good. He had heard there were factory jobs in Westbrook, a city about 90 miles east. A man named Dennis, who had worked the crane at Consolidated, had gotten a position there 2 months back and sent word through the informal network of displaced steelworkers that the hiring manager was still looking. Marcus had written down the address on a piece of paper he kept folded in his jacket pocket. He had planned to take the Greyhound, but the last bus to Westbrook departed the Clarkfield depot at 9:15 in the evening, and Marcus had arrived at the depot at 9:19, still breathing hard from running 6 blocks with his bag. The woman behind the counter had looked at him with something between pity and indifference and said, "Next one isn't until 7 tomorrow morning." Marcus had stood there for a long moment, processing that, and then walked back outside into the rain. His phone battery was at 3%. He did not have the money for a motel room. The night stretched out ahead of him, like a road with no end and no lights. So he walked to the edge of Route 9, stuck out his arm, and began counting cars. The 18th set of headlights slowed, then stopped. Marcus squinted through the rain at a dark blue Honda sedan, the kind of car that disappeared in parking lots because there were so many like it. The driver's window came down, and a woman leaned slightly toward the opening. She was perhaps 40, perhaps a little older, with dark hair pulled back simply, and an expression that was open and unhurried. She was wearing a plain gray fleece jacket. No jewelry that he could see. She did not look at him with the cautious, narrowed expression he had come to expect when strangers encountered him in circumstances like these, the expression that weighed him against some private calculus of risk, and almost always reached the same conclusion. She looked at him the way someone looked at a door they intended to open, just a woman in a sensible car, looking at him without fear or suspicion, as if a soaked stranger on a dark road at night was simply a person who needed help. Marcus straightened, pulled his bag a little closer to his side out of habit, and tried to look as unthreatening as a 6'1" man in a soaked jacket could look at midnight. "Where are you headed?" she asked. Her voice was calm, clear, no tremor in it, no performance of bravery, just directness. "Westbrook," Marcus said. "I can get you to Westbrook," she said. "Come on and get in." He did not move immediately. One beat of hesitation. Just one, the old reflex of a man who had learned to double-check goodness before trusting it. Then he opened the door and got in. Her name was Olivia Carter. She told him that within the first 2 minutes, in the easy, matter-of-fact way, that people sometimes introduce themselves when proximity makes formality feel unnecessary. She did not ask why he was standing in the rain. She did not ask why he had no car, no ride, no plan. She turned the heat up without being asked, because she could see he was cold, and she drove with the quiet confidence of someone who was comfortable with silence and did not feel the need to fill it. The car was clean, but not immaculate. There was a reusable coffee cup in the cup holder, and a small stack of what looked like printed reports on the back seat, face down. The radio was off. Outside, the rain hammered the windshield, and the wipers kept their steady rhythm, and Marcus sat back in the passenger seat and felt, for the first time in a long time, the specific relief of being somewhere warm and dry. He was careful, at first, the way a man who has learned caution learns it not from a single lesson, but from years of accumulated ones. He kept his bag on his lap. He sat straight. He watched the road and answered her questions with the measured economy of someone who does not want to give offense or take up too much space. But Olivia Carter had a way of asking questions that made it easy to answer them. She asked what he had done for work. She listened when he told her. Not the performed listening of someone waiting for their turn to speak, but the real kind. The kind where the other person's eyes stay steady and their body stays still, and you can feel that they are actually absorbing what you are saying. When he told her about the plant closure, she did not say "I'm sorry" in the thin, reflexive way that people said it when they meant nothing by it. She said, "That's a hard thing. Losing work that you were good at." Marcus looked at her when she said that. He wasn't used to that particular phrasing. He wasn't used to someone acknowledging not just the loss of a job, but the loss of the competence that had been attached to it. She drove with both hands on the wheel. She wore no rings. Her nails were trimmed short and unpolished. There was something about her that did not quite add up, and Marcus felt the faint stirring of that awareness without being able to name it precisely. She carried herself like someone who had been educated, not just schooled, but actually educated, in the way that some people were, in the way that gave them a certain quality of attention, and a vocabulary that moved easily between the formal and the plain. And yet she was driving a mid-range sedan on a back highway at 11 at night, alone, picking up strangers. People with money did not usually do that, at least not in Marcus's experience. He had encountered wealthy people occasionally over the years, plant owners, visiting executives, the kind of men who came down to the floor in pressed shirts to observe and then went back up to offices Marcus never saw. They had a particular quality of distance, a way of being present without being there, as if their actual selves were always in a different room. This woman did not have that quality. She was completely, attentively, unusually there. He filed the observation away and let it sit. Her phone rang for the first time somewhere around mile 40. She glanced at the screen on the dashboard display and declined the call without a word. A minute later it rang again. Same number. She declined it again. Then, a different number. She declined that one too. The dashboard display showed the caller ID in small blue letters, and Marcus, without meaning to, caught a fragment of it, the word holdings, in the company name before the screen dimmed. He thought nothing of it at first. Corporate calls at odd hours were not unheard of. Maybe she worked in finance. Maybe she was a regional manager of some kind, the sort of person whose evenings were never entirely their own. He had known people like that at the plant, supervisors who left the floor but never really left the job, whose phones rang during dinner and whose minds were always halfway back at the line. He shifted his gaze back to the rain-slicked road and said nothing. But the calls kept coming. 4 in 20 minutes. She declined every one, with the same unhurried press of a finger, the same absence of apology or explanation. That, Marcus thought, was not a person avoiding an inconvenient colleague. That was a person exercising a particular kind of authority, the authority of someone who had decided, for reasons of their own, not to be reached tonight, and who did not feel the need to justify the decision to anyone. She received a text message that the car's system read aloud, in the neutral voice of an automated assistant she had forgotten, apparently, to disable that feature. The voice said, "Board meeting rescheduled to 7 a.m. Investors are waiting on your approval. Please advise." Olivia reached over and turned the audio notification off with a quick tap, and something in the precision of that gesture, the practiced, automatic way she silenced it, made Marcus think of executives he had seen on television. The ones who moved through rooms like they owned them without needing to say so. He glanced at her profile, in the pale glow of the dashboard. She was looking at the road, expression unchanged. "Sorry about that," she said. "Work never really stops." "What kind of work?" Marcus asked. She smiled at the windshield. "Operations," she said. "What about you? What kind of work are you looking for in Westbrook?" And just like that, smoothly and without any apparent effort, she redirected the conversation back to him. They stopped at a diner called Patsy's, just off the highway near a town called Elmore. Olivia said she needed coffee and asked if he was hungry. Marcus said he was fine. She ordered anyway 2 plates of eggs and toast and hash browns, black coffee for herself, whatever he wanted to drink. He asked for water and then, after a moment, changed it to coffee too. The diner was nearly empty at that hour. A trucker at the counter, working through a piece of pie with the focused efficiency of someone eating for fuel rather than pleasure. A young couple in a booth near the window, leaning close, speaking quietly in the way that people do when the outside world has gone dark and small, and the only geography that matters is the table between them. A waitress named Greta, who moved with the weary efficiency of someone 4 hours into a late shift, the particular economy of motion that comes from doing a physical job in a small space for a long time. The diner smelled of coffee and bacon grease, and the faintly sweet, yeasty smell of old booths, and Marcus, when he settled into the seat across from Olivia, felt some last reserve of tension go out of his shoulders that he had not realized he was still holding. He had been cold and wet and alone for hours. He was now warm and dry, and sitting across a table from someone who had chosen to stop for him. And the difference between those two conditions was, at that particular moment, everything. Greta brought their coffee and set it down, and when she looked at Olivia, something flickered in her expression, a double take. So quick it was barely a thing at all, just a slight widening of the eyes. And then the professional composure snapping back into place. She looked again when she walked away. Marcus noticed it. Olivia, if she noticed it too, gave no sign. They ate. The food was plain and hot, and exactly what the hour required. Marcus ate more than he had intended to, because he had not realized until the plate was in front of him how long it had been since he had eaten a real meal. Olivia watched him. Without watching him, she had that quality, the ability to observe without appearing to observe, the way that certain people did when they were professionally accustomed to reading rooms. She drank her coffee slowly. Outside, the rain had lightened to a mist. The highway ran past the window like a gray ribbon. Marcus set down his fork and looked at the surface of the table for a moment, and then said, without really meaning to say it quite yet, "I got turned down for 11 jobs in the last 3 months." Olivia did not react with surprise or sympathy or any of the social performances that usually met that kind of admission. She just nodded, slowly, once and said, "What did each of them say when they turned you down?" That question opened something. It was the specificity of it. Not that so hard or keep your chin up, but an actual inquiry, a wanting to understand the shape of the thing. Marcus found himself talking in a way he had not talked to anyone in a long time about the interviews that went well until they didn't, about the hiring manager in Canton, who had seemed genuinely interested, until Marcus walked into the room and watched the man's expression go through a subtle recalibration that Marcus had learned to recognize over the years, the kind that had nothing to do with his resume. About the plant in Youngstown that said the position had been filled but posted the same listing again 2 weeks later. About the specific exhaustion of trying to stay optimistic when the evidence kept accumulating in the other direction. He talked, and Olivia listened, and the coffee cups were refilled once and then again. And outside the rain had stopped entirely, and the parking lot of Patsy's Diner held the quiet, still shine of wet asphalt under fluorescent light. "I used to think working hard was enough," Marcus said at some point. "I still think it should be. I just stopped being sure that it is." Olivia wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and looked at the window for a moment. "It's not always enough," she said. "That's the part no one likes to say out loud. Working hard is necessary. It's just not sufficient." She paused. "I think the part they leave out is that you also have to be positioned right. And being positioned right often depends on things that have nothing to do with what you've earned." Marcus looked at her. "That sounds like something someone who figured it out eventually says." She laughed a short, genuine laugh with nothing performed in it. "Maybe," she said. "I've had enough time, on both sides of that equation." Marcus almost asked what she meant, but something in the way she said it made him hesitate, and the moment passed, and Greta came back to ask if they needed anything else. And the look she gave Olivia this time was unmistakable. Not rudeness, not familiarity, but recognition. The specific, controlled look of someone who has placed a face and is deciding how to handle the information. Olivia excused herself after they had finished eating, saying she needed to make a call. She walked to the far end of the diner near the restrooms, her back to the room, phone held to her ear, voice too low to carry. She had left her jacket on the back of her chair and her second phone, a sleeker, newer device than the one she had been using all evening, on the seat beside her coffee cup. Marcus hadn't noticed the second phone until now. It lit up with a notification as he sat there, and he did not mean to read it. He genuinely did not mean to. But it was right there, face up, and the text was large, and his eyes moved to it the way eyes move to light. The notification read, "Chairwoman Carter, urgent. Global Holdings quarterly review needs signature before market open." Marcus read it once. Then he read it again. Then he sat very still for a moment, the way a person sits when the ground has shifted under them, and they are trying to determine whether they are still standing. Chairwoman. Global Holdings. He had heard of Global Holdings. He picked up his own phone, which he had managed to charge to 22% from a cord Olivia had offered him when they got in the car, and he typed the name into a search engine with the careful, deliberate focus of someone who needs to be sure. The results came back immediately. Global Holdings International. Headquarters in New York. Regional offices in 14 countries. A conglomerate with interests in manufacturing, logistics, real estate, and green energy. Market capitalization in the hundreds of billions. And there, in the third result, in an article from a major financial publication dated 8 months ago, a photograph. A woman in a dark blazer, hair down around her shoulders, standing in front of a wall of glass that looked out over a city skyline. The caption read, "Olivia Carter, chairwoman and majority stakeholder of Global Holdings International, ranked among the 20 wealthiest individuals in the United States. Estimated net worth, $11.8 billion. Marcus stared at the photograph for a long time. He looked up at the woman standing at the far end of Patsy's Diner, her back to him, her voice still low, her plain gray fleece jacket draped over a vinyl diner chair. He looked back at the photograph. Then he set his phone face down on the table and sat with his hands flat on the formica surface, and breathed. She came back to the table and sat down and picked up her coffee and looked at him and immediately knew He could tell that she knew by the way her expression settled not into guilt or embarrassment, but into something quieter and more resigned, as if she had been waiting for this moment, and now that it had arrived, she simply had to meet it. "You saw the phone," she said. "It was not a question. I didn't mean to," Marcus said. "The notification came up while you were—" "I know," she said. "It's all right." He looked at her across the table. The Patsy's Diner fluorescent light was not flattering to anyone, but it was revealing. It showed the fine lines around her eyes, the faint shadows of tiredness, the particular quality of a face that had spent many years being composed in public, and still, in private moments, let the weight of things show through. 11.8 billion, Marcus said. He said it the way you say a number that doesn't compute, testing it against the air to see if it makes more sense out loud. It didn't. She looked at him calmly. "Yes," she said, "that is approximately correct." He had questions. Of course he had questions. The first one, the one that pushed everything else aside, was simple. Why? Why was she here? Why the ordinary car, the plain clothes, the diner off a back highway at 11 at night, the accepting of a stranger into her vehicle without bodyguards or drivers or any of the apparatus that accompanied people of that kind of wealth? Olivia set her coffee cup down and folded her hands on the table and told him. She did it straightforwardly, without drama, the way someone tells a story they have told before, but have never gotten tired of, because it still means something to them. She took these trips, she said, 2 or 3 times a year, alone. No staff, no security, no itinerary, beyond a rough direction. She drove. She ate in places like this. She talked to people like Marcus not to extract something from them, not as some kind of philanthropic exercise or social experiment, but because it was the only way she knew to stay connected to the actual texture of things. When you have that kind of money, she said, everyone around you is managing you. Everyone is telling you what they think you want to hear. Everything is filtered. She looked out the window at the dark highway. I grew up without any of it. I know what it feels like to not have it. I don't want to forget. She was from Decatur, Illinois. Her father had worked 2 jobs, most of her childhood a daytime shift at a bottling plant and weekend shifts at a hardware store. Her mother had cleaned offices. Olivia had been the first in her family to finish college, and she had done it on a combination of scholarships and work study and a determination that she later described as having no alternative, not because failure was unthinkable, but because the people counting on her made it inadmissible. She had started her first business at 26, in a converted garage, with $11,000 that she had saved over 4 years, and a business plan that 3 banks had rejected before a 4th agreed to a small loan. She had slept in her car for 6 weeks, during one particularly difficult stretch in those early years, when the business was hemorrhaging money and her apartment lease had expired, and she refused to admit to her parents how badly things were going. "I know what it is," she said quietly, "to be invisible, to be in a place and have people look through you. I never quite got used to it, but I got very good at surviving it." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "And now?" She smiled. "Now, I try to use what I've built for something real," she said. "But I also try to remember what it costs a person, what it actually costs. Because it's easy to forget when the circumstances change, and I don't want to be the kind of person who forgets." He asked her, later, when they were back in the car, and Westbrook was only 30 miles ahead, whether she was always this open with the strangers she picked up. She thought about it seriously before answering. "Not always this specific," she said. "Usually I just listen. You'd be surprised how much you can understand about a person, and about the world, just from listening to them for an hour." "And what did you understand about me?" Marcus asked. She glanced over at him briefly, then back at the road. "That you're someone who works hard because it matters to you, not because you're trying to prove something," she said. "That you've been told, in various ways, that your value is negotiable, and that you've somehow resisted internalizing that even though it would have been easier not to." Marcus did not respond right away. He turned and looked out at the dark fields moving past the window, the occasional yellow square of a farmhouse light, the sky beginning to separate slightly from the land in the east. "Not sure I've always resisted it," he said finally. "Sure you have," she said simply. "You'd know if you hadn't." The offer came in a pause, somewhere in those last 30 miles, when the conversation had worn down to a companionable quiet. Olivia said it without preamble, the way she said most things directly, without the softening that sometimes made offers feel like theater. She said that Global Holdings ran an operations management development program, a 12-month intensive, that took experienced workers from industrial backgrounds and gave them the frameworks, the tools, and the exposure to move into operational leadership roles. She said she saw, in the work Marcus had described, a specific kind of competence that was genuinely hard to find, the kind that lived in the body as much as the mind, that came from actually doing things, rather than from learning how they were supposed to be done. She said she could not promise him it would be easy. She could promise him it would be real. Marcus listened. He said nothing for a while. The city lights of Westbrook were beginning to thicken on the horizon. He thought about Dennis, and the factory job, and the piece of paper folded in his jacket pocket, with the address on it. He thought about 17 cars that had not stopped. He thought about what it meant to be 38 years old, and have the floor give way and still be standing. "What if I'm not good enough for it?" he said. It was the truest question he had asked all night. Olivia did not dismiss it. "That's the only question worth asking before you say yes," she said. "It means you're taking it seriously, and it means you're the kind of person who would actually do the work." She paused. "The people who already think they're good enough usually aren't." Marcus thought about that for a long time. Then he said yes. The Global Holdings Regional Operations Center was located on the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Westbrook, and it was unlike any place Marcus had ever worked. He had spent 14 years in a building where the floors were concrete, and the air smelled of oil and metal, and the lighting was industrial fluorescent strips that flickered if you looked at them wrong. The operations center had carpeting and climate control, and a coffee machine that produced drinks with Italian names. There were people who moved through the hallways with the purposeful confidence of the credentialed, people who had never been dirty on a job, who had never operated machinery with their hands, who carried their expertise in spreadsheets and decks, and the particular fluency of those who had always known how to navigate rooms like this. Marcus walked in on his first morning, in a jacket he had bought at a second-hand store, and shoes that were clean but not new, and he felt the weight of every set of eyes that tracked him from the elevator to his assigned workspace. Not hostility necessarily, not always. More like the particular form of assessment that environments like that specialized in, the fast and thorough calculation of where someone belonged and whether they belonged here. His supervisor on the program was a man named Patrick Hargrove, 45, a former consultant who had been with Global Holdings for 7 years and had the particular air of someone who had decided early in his career which people were worth his attention and had not significantly revised that list. Patrick was not overtly cruel. He was something subtler, and in some ways harder to navigate, someone who expressed skepticism through process, through the assignment of tasks designed to expose inadequacy, through the slow and deliberate raising of bars that he did not bother to explain were being raised. Marcus noted all of it. He said nothing. He went home at night to the small furnished room he was renting, and he read the materials that the program assigned, and the additional materials he found himself. And he went back in the morning, and he did the work. He did not complain. He did not ask for special accommodation. He did not appeal to Olivia, who had made it clear from the beginning that what she had given him was an entry point, not a pass. The door was open. But what happened once he walked through it was entirely up to him. The other trainees in the program were a mixed group. 2 had MBA degrees, 1 had a background in supply chain consulting, 1 was a former Army logistics officer who had the organized, efficient manner of someone who had managed resources in genuinely high-stakes situations. Marcus was the only one without a college degree. He did not volunteer this information. When it became apparent through context, over the first few weeks, the reactions were predictable: a slight repositioning, a recalibration, the unspoken arithmetic that certain environments perform automatically when the credentials do not add up to expectation. He felt it. He did not particularly mind it, because he had felt it before, and because he had learned by now that the best response to that kind of arithmetic was simply to make it irrelevant. The program ran through simulations and case studies and live analysis of actual operational problems within the company's various divisions. Marcus was slow at first. With the frameworks, the terminology was new, the software was new, the whole vocabulary of the work was new. But underneath all of that, the problems were problems he recognized. They were problems of flow and efficiency and the human behavior of workers under pressure. And he knew those problems from the inside, not from a textbook, and that knowledge was specific and dense and real, in a way that the textbook versions were not. There was a morning in his third month when the program was working through a case study of a distribution center in Atlanta that had been hemorrhaging labor costs due to scheduling inefficiencies. The other trainees approached it analytically, running regressions, building models, producing recommendations that were technically correct and practically unworkable. Marcus sat quietly through 2 presentations before he said anything. Then he said, calmly and without any performance of authority, that the problem wasn't the scheduling model. The model was fine. The problem was that the workers on the floor were running 3 distinct informal workarounds that had developed in response to the model's failure to account for actual physical bottlenecks, and those workarounds were what was producing the cost overrun. The room went quiet. Patrick looked at him. "How do you know that?" he said. Marcus said, "Because that's what workers do when the system doesn't account for the way the job actually works. They fix it themselves, and then the fix becomes a problem. And then management tries to fix the problem without understanding why the fix existed in the first place." Patrick held his gaze for a moment. Then he said, "Walk us through what you do instead." Marcus walked them through it. It took 11 minutes. Nobody interrupted. The crisis happened in month 7. A manufacturing facility in Gary, Indiana, one of Global Holdings' older production sites, acquired 3 years prior, in a merger experienced a cascade failure in its ventilation and cooling systems during a production run of precision components. The failure was not catastrophic in the sense of injuries, but it was catastrophic in the sense of consequences. Without the cooling systems, the production environment became unstable, and unstable environments in precision manufacturing meant scrap rates that could, if the run was not properly managed in the interim, translate to losses that the division's quarterly numbers could not absorb. The facility had been running the components for a defense contractor, a tight margin, high specification order with a delivery window that allowed no slippage. Every hour the line sat idle was money the contract did not cover. Every hour it ran under the wrong conditions was components that would fail quality inspection, which was in some ways worse. The engineers on site had been awake for 18 hours trying to find a workaround. The HVAC contractor was 4 hours out. The clock was doing what clocks did in these situations, running faster than anyone wanted it to. The regional director had 2 solutions on the table. Halt the run entirely at an estimated cost of $1.4 million in lost production, or attempt a partial continuation using an improvised temperature management protocol that no one on the current team had actually implemented before. Patrick had escalated to senior leadership. Senior leadership had escalated to Olivia's office. And somewhere in that chain of escalation, a note had landed on the desk of the program director that mentioned Marcus Williams and his background in heavy manufacturing. He was in the building when it happened, working on a separate project in one of the conference rooms, and the call came to his program-issued phone at 2 in the afternoon. They needed him on a video link with the Gary facility within the next 20 minutes. He asked 3 questions before he joined the call: what kind of cooling system, what stage of the production run, and what were the current floor temperatures. They told him. He joined the call. The facility manager in Gary, a stressed, capable woman named Sandra Reyes, had already identified the core problem with the improvised protocol that was on the table. It would work for a portion of the run, but would create a thermal inconsistency in the 3rd stage that would compromise tolerances. Marcus agreed with her assessment. He proposed a modification. Sandra looked at him on the screen with the evaluating expression of someone who has learned to be skeptical of people offering solutions to problems they have not personally experienced. He walked her through the modification, step by step, with the specific language of someone who had actually stood on a production floor and understood what it asked of the people running it. Sandra listened. She asked 3 questions of her own. He answered them. She said, "All right, let's try it." The run completed. The scrap rate came in at 3.2% above normal, acceptable, within the range that the quarterly numbers could absorb. The 1.4 million loss did not happen. Olivia addressed the leadership team at the monthly review 2 weeks later. She mentioned the Gary situation specifically. She talked about the value of bringing operational expertise from the floor level into management decision-making. She said, in front of the regional directors and division heads and Patrick Hargrove, that Marcus Williams had demonstrated exactly the kind of applied intelligence that the company needed more of at every level. She did not sentimentalize it. She did not frame it as a charity story or a redemption arc. She presented it as a business case, as evidence that the pool of talent they were drawing on was too narrow, that the credentials they used as filters were screening out capability rather than screening it in. Patrick sat very still during this portion of the presentation. Several of the regional directors wrote things down. Marcus, who was not in the room, heard about it that evening from the program coordinator, a young woman named Alicia Torres, who had been quietly rooting for him since the second month, and who delivered the news with a brightness in her expression that she made no effort to contain. Things shifted after Gary. Not dramatically, Marcus had worked in environments long enough to know that shifts of the dramatic kind were mostly fiction, that real change moved slowly and often circled back before it moved forward. But the quality of the attention changed. The weight of certain presences lightened. Patrick began including him in conversations that had previously not been directed at him, forwarding emails that had not previously found their way to Marcus's inbox, using his name in meetings in the straightforward, attributive way that indicated a person had become a known quantity. There were still days that were hard days when the gap between what Marcus knew from experience and what he was expected to know from training made him feel the distance between where he was and where he needed to be. But the gap was narrowing, and he could feel it narrowing, which was different from the long months after the plant closure, when he had been unable to feel anything moving in any direction at all. The other trainee, who had been most pointed in his initial skepticism, a man named Connor Webb, 29, with a master's degree and an unearned certainty about most things, approached Marcus one afternoon in the break room and asked, with a stiffness that was clearly costing him something, whether Marcus would be willing to talk through a problem he was having with a supply chain simulation. Marcus said sure. They worked through it for 45 minutes. Connor thanked him without making it small. Marcus told him it was no problem. Both of them understood that something had been navigated, and that it had required something from both of them, and that this was how most things of any actual significance worked. At the end of the program's formal 12 months, Marcus was offered a full-time position as an operations associate at the Westbrook Regional Center. The title was modest. The salary was more than he had made in any year at Consolidated Steel. He accepted without negotiation, because what he was being offered was not principally the money. It was a floor, a solid one, a place to stand, from which he could see, for the first time in a long time, a real direction. He signed the offer letter at a desk in a glass building in Westbrook, and for a moment, pen still in hand, he thought about a diner called Patsy's and a dark highway and 17 cars that had not stopped. He thought about a plain gray fleece jacket and a coffee cup and a phone that had lit up with the wrong information at the right time. He thought about what it meant that one person had stopped and most had not, and what it said about the world and what you were supposed to do with that information. He did not arrive at a clean answer. He thought, too, about all the Marcus Williamses out there, on other highways, in other rain, counting other cars, and what it would take for more of them to encounter an 18th car that stopped. That was a larger question than he had any immediate answer for. But it was the kind of question that stayed with a person, the kind that did not let you put it down and walk away. He signed the letter and folded his copy and put it in his jacket pocket, in the same place where the piece of paper with the Westbrook factory address had once lived. A year after that night, on Route 9, on an early Saturday morning in October, when the air had the particular quality of a beginning cool, but not cold, clear, with that specific autumn light that made everything look like it was being seen for the first time, Marcus drove to a coffee shop in downtown Westbrook called the Third Cup and found Olivia Carter already there, seated at a corner table with a plain black coffee and a newspaper folded to the crossword. She was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. No jewelry. She looked exactly as she had looked that night in the diner, which was to say she looked like herself, which was to say she looked like someone who had decided a long time ago that appearance was not the thing and had never had reason to revise that decision. She looked up when Marcus walked in and smiled the same unhurried, direct smile that had come through the window of a Honda sedan in the rain and changed the direction of his life. They sat together for almost 2 hours. Marcus told her about Gary, about the offer letter, about Connor Webb, and the supply chain simulation, and the very specific quality of Patrick Hargrove's acknowledgement, which had never become warmth but had become, reliably, respect. Olivia listened. She asked questions. She ordered a second coffee, and Marcus ordered a piece of pie that arrived larger than expected, and they divided it without discussion, in the easy shorthand of people who have shared a meal before and know the grammar of it. Outside, the Saturday morning moved past the window, a couple walking a large dog, a man unlocking the door of a bookstore, 2 teenagers on bikes, taking the corner faster than they should have. Marcus watched it all with a quality of attention that was different from how he had watched the world a year ago. Not more relaxed, exactly. More present. More in the place where he actually was, rather than in the complicated calculation of where he was supposed to be going. He picked up his coffee and held it and said, "Can I ask you something?" Olivia looked at him. "Of course," he said. "Why did you stop that night?" "On Route 9. There were plenty of other cars." Olivia wrapped her hands around her own cup the way she had that night in Patsy's. The same gesture, and she looked at the table for a moment before she looked back at him. 11 years ago, she said, I was driving on a road in Illinois, in rain very much like that rain, and I ran out of gas. I had $32 in my wallet, and the card I had was declined, and I was standing on the shoulder of the highway with a gas can and no idea what to do next. She paused. A man stopped. He was old, maybe 70. He put my gas can in his trunk and drove me to the station 3 miles up the road and refused to take anything for it. He said he'd been helped once when he needed it, and he was just keeping it moving. She looked at Marcus steadily. I thought about him a lot, the years after that, when things got very hard, and also when things got very good. I thought about what he chose to do on a specific night, on a specific road, and how far that choice had traveled. Marcus was quiet. So that night, he said, on Route 9, I was keeping it moving, she said simply. There was a long silence between them then, but it was the good kind, the kind that held something rather than waiting for something. Outside, the couple with the dog walked back past the window in the other direction. The man at the bookstore had the door open now, and the warm light from inside fell in a rectangle on the sidewalk. Marcus thought about the 17 cars. He thought about the 18th. He thought about what it meant that a man of 70 on an Illinois highway had given a woman $32 worth of his afternoon, and how that single act had traveled forward through years and difficulty and transformation and had arrived, eventually, on Route 9 inches Ohio in the rain, and had traveled forward again from there. He thought about Gary, Indiana, and Sandra Reyes's evaluating expression and the way it had changed. He thought about Alicia Torres's brightness. He thought about what he would do. In a year, in 5 years, when he was the one who knew the thing that someone else needed to know. He thought about what it meant to keep something moving. The morning light came through the coffee shop window and lay warm across the table, and Marcus Williams sat in it and held his coffee and felt, not for the first time, but perhaps for the first time with full conviction, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Marcus had thought he was asking for a ride. He had been standing in the rain, soaked and tired and counting cars in the dark, and all he had wanted was to get to the next town. He had not been asking for anything more than that. But what he had gotten was something that did not have a clean name, not charity, not luck, not even exactly opportunity, though it had been all of those things in different measures. What he had gotten was the specific grace of being seen by someone who still remembered what it cost not to be seen, who had carried that memory forward through all the years and all the distance, and had refused to let it go abstract. The rain had stopped. The road had taken him somewhere. And somewhere along the way, in a diner, in a glass building, on a production floor in Gary, in a corner table of a coffee shop on a Saturday morning, he had become, without quite noticing when it happened, the person he had been working toward for a very long time. He had boarded that car expecting to travel 90 miles. What the journey had actually covered was a distance that could not be measured in any unit he knew, and that was still going, out ahead of him, in the direction of everything that had not happened yet.